who have contributed and commented positively, and I commend this bill to the House.
I call the Honourable Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Alistair Scott has identified a serious problem. Madam Speaker, in the view of Labor members, and we'll be making the case through this debate, his solution falls well short of the level that we would need to see in order to support this bill to Select Committee. There's no question that drug impairment on our roads is a serious threat to life and limb of New Zealanders as they travel to and from work and around this country. But the random roadside drug testing regime that Alistair Scott proposes with this bill, we believe, has a number of flaws that make it implausible and impractical. The bill amends the Land Transport Act by introducing a regime for detecting drug driving in relation to just 3 drugs: THC, MDMA, that's ecstasy, and methamphetamine, by allowing for random oral fluid testing by police officers. There is no question, let me repeat, that drug driving is a serious problem that requires action. But we want to see an effective measure in response to that. We would support a change to legislation if it was required, and if the technology exists and was reliable enough and proven to allow roadside testing in a timely, efficient and reliable way. That technology does not currently exist. So this bill attempts to solve a problem with measures that we believe are inadequate. The tests are slow, they are expensive at $45 a test, they identify only 3 types of drugs, and this is the critical point, they only detect the presence of the drug. They have nothing to say about impairment. And I want to come to the advice from the Attorney-General about that, because that is the major flaw in Alistair Scott's bill where it falls short. I want to point out, Madam Speaker, that the Honourable Stuart Nash and the Honourable Julianne Genter, Police Minister and Associate Transport Minister with responsibility for safety, are working on this issue. They have work underway, and we are confident on this side of the House that they will come up with something that is comprehensive and effective, unlike this bill.
9 years. 9 years.
Alistair Scott reports in his comments that about 1/3 of road deaths involve someone with drugs in their system, often mixed with alcohol. But he doesn't elaborate on whether that person caused the incident or whether they were adversely affected by drugs at the time. This is a case of policy-based evidence-making. We prefer to do that in reverse and base our policy and our legislation on actual evidence. Madam Speaker, we do take drug harm very seriously in the Labor Party. We are committed to comprehensively responding to the Law Commission's report on controlling and regulating drugs, a review of the Misuse of Drugs Act, and we are committed to replacing the current Misuse of Drugs Act. This bill is not support for this bill is not some kind of litmus test for serious commitment to drug reform. So, what are the problems with this bill? Well, the first is that the oral tests that are currently being marketed that would be used to administer the test under Alistair Scott's bill are both expensive and unreliable. False positives are very likely to undermine the credibility of the regime and undermine the public confidence in the way that the police are required to administer this regime. I've already said, Dr. Smith, we believe this bill falls well short of the quality that would be expected if we were going to send it off to Select Committee and spend a significant amount of taxpayer public resources giving scrutiny to this bill. It just doesn't get over the line. The other critical thing is that the roadside saliva testing devices can take between 3 and 5 minutes to produce a result. And I ask the members in the House tonight to imagine a random testing regime, the equivalent of a booze bus on some busy highway, stopping people and subjecting them with no prior cause, reasonable cause, to believe that they are impaired, to a test that takes 3 to 5 minutes, when members know that currently, with alcohol testing, it is a few seconds. The test literally takes a few seconds and people are on their way again. I ask Alistair Scott to consider how New Zealanders will feel when they are randomly stopped on the highway, they are going about their business, and they are made to stop for 5 minutes or more, when there's no reason, no prior cause, no reason to believe that they are impaired in any way, and then they are stacked up on the side of the road, dozens and dozens of people waiting for their results to come through. I don't think he's thought that through at all. Maybe the member, when he makes his return contribution, will tell us on an average day on a highway in New Zealand how many people are likely to actually be under the influence of drugs on the highway.
That's the reason not to do it.
What I'm saying, Mr. Scott, is that you might say that there are large numbers of people who are involved in accidents who turn out to be drug impaired, but the actual percentage of people who are on the highway who would be picked up by a random testing regime is actually likely to be very low. For all I know, it could easily be 1% or 2%. So that member is happy to subject those people to an expensive, time-consuming and unreliable random testing regime. It's completely impractical. I just don't think the member has thought this through. I want to draw the House's attention to the comments made by the Attorney-General on his Bill of Rights advice. He points to Clause 12 in the bill, which introduces a power for an enforcement officer to require a driver to undergo a compulsory oral fluid test. And the Attorney basically subjects Alistair Scott's bill to 3 tests. The first is consistency with Section 21 of the Bill of Rights, the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. And in the view of the Attorney-General, the bill's policy statement does not address how effective the current drug driving detection regime is, or whether random oral fluid testing will in fact introduce a more effective regime. Well, that's worrying for a start. He goes on to say there are inadequate procedural safeguards to ensure that these powers are exercised in a reasonable manner. Without statutory safeguards or any other guidelines, the oral fluid test provided for by the bill does not appear fit for this evidential purpose. For those reasons, the Attorney-General considers that the requirement to undergo one or more compulsory random oral fluid tests is inconsistent with Section 21 of the Bill of Rights Act, which provides for the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. He then goes on to look at the provision in the Bill of Rights Act which provides for the right to be not arbitrarily detained, and again says that an enforcement officer may use this power under Alistair Scott's bill without any cause to suspect that a person has consumed a specified drug. Once detained, I understand he says the test could take up to 5 minutes if undertaken at the roadside, or significantly longer if the person is required to accompany the officer to another place to undergo the test. So the Attorney-General concludes that the bill is disproportionate and may lead to a warrantless arrest if the person fails to comply. So it fails on Section 22 of the Bill of Rights. It also fails on Section 25C of the Bill of Rights, the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. So without adequate procedural safeguards and any requirement for due cause, the Attorney-General considers that the process of conducting the oral fluid test constitutes both an unreasonable search and seizure and an arbitrary detention. So the Attorney-General's concerns based on the Bill of Rights Act perfectly mirror the practical concerns about this test. It's a random testing regime based on a technology that is unreliable, expensive and time-consuming, completely disproportionate to the possible gain to be achieved through the random testing regime. Madam Speaker, in our view, this bill falls well short of the standard that we would expect for a bill that we would support to go to Select Committee. Thank you.
I call Jamie Lee Ross.
Madam Speaker, I know it's been a very challenging day.